First of all, let me state that I am a devoted The Week magazine reader, and have been for a decade. The following are my favorite articles, paraphrased and read from the March 25th, 2022 issue of The Week magazine. In my personal opinion, this magazine and its junior publication are the best written journalism has to offer, and I definitely recommend to anyone that has not yet subscribed to at least check out a few issues and see what you think. The Week magazine can be ordered online at theweek.com/order now. Okay, let's get into it. Stalled in its efforts to advance on Ukraine's major cities, the Russian military this week stepped up aerial bombardments that destroyed residencies, school government buildings, and hospitals, killed thousands of civilians, and left others without food, power, or heat. In northern Chernihiv, Russian troops who circled the city are quote, annihilating civilians, and said Mayor Vladislav Ardashenko. A withering Russian assault in southern Mariupol killed an estimated 2,500 civilians, many of whom were rolled into mass graves, and left dozens of buildings, including a maternity hospital, reduced to rubble, and hundreds of thousands of cold, hungry people trapped in basements and shelters. This article is long, and I could give the full report, but it's actually hard to read, as the Russian military brutalizes people who they claim to be trying to liberate. The problem being, you can't liberate a people who are already free while pushing an imperialistic agenda for your motherland. Amid all this destruction, though, Russian ground forces have made little progress, said U.S. defense officials. Russian officials were calling up reinforcements and trying to recruit mercenaries from Syria and elsewhere, reportedly asking the Chinese government for troop rations and other supplies. Russian soldiers were reportedly looting houses and stores in search of food, and convoys were stalled due to fuel shortages and equipment failures. Isn't it funny that much like the American Revolution, the aggressors turned to brutalizing the people in order to steal supplies their homeland cannot provide them? Much like colonial Americans, we must look at the Ukrainian people who, like we did, are fighting for their sovereignty from a despotic and imperialistic nation. Peace talks resumed, and negotiators for Russian President Vladimir Putin said the discussions had shown progress on a number of positions. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said there was certainly room for compromise, and that Russian negotiators were becoming more realistic in their demands. Any war ends with an agreement, he said. In the Washington Post, Greg Jaffe and Meg Kelly paint a more bleak picture of Mariupol, where a humanitarian catastrophe is underway. The Washington Post says military analysts fear it offers a sign of what's to come in Kiev and across Ukraine. As the war grinds on, David Von Drehl of the Washington Post says inflicting such devastation may look like strength, but the real story is Russia's weakness. In his zeal to flex his muscles, Putin has instead revealed the extent of his nation's decline, making one tactical blunder after another, failing to establish air superiority, sending tank columns down open roads to ambush, and failing to provide troops with food and armored vehicles with fuel. No wonder Putin is pleading for help from Xi Jinping. James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, reports to Bloomberg that undertrained and undersupplied Russian troops have already absorbed around 4,000 casualties as they fight well-armed locals who know every corner and intersection. The Russians still have more troops and better equipment, and time is on their side, said Yasmin Saran in The Atlantic. Said, Putin can't afford to lose. Michael Kaufman, a Russian military expert at the Center for Naval Analysis, says Putin is now using the same scorched earth tactics that leveled cities in Syria and Chechnya, where arguably far less was at stake. Tom McTeague in The Atlantic says that Putin needs an off-ramp. He states that in a zero-sum conflict, the only way to get Putin back down is to make concessions that may cede parts of eastern Ukraine to Russia. It may be a bitter pill to swallow, but this analyst states that the only way to win is to make it look like we lost. Jim Garrity in National Review states Putin doesn't want an off-ramp. He's dead set on crushing Ukraine and ousting Zelensky, and to achieve those goals, he doesn't care how much he and everyone else has to pay in blood and treasure. So what next? Guy Fallenbridge from Reuters reports, a high-ranking source in the Kremlin gives a FedEx-like window of 3 days to a week for Putin to make a decision to press on or come to an agreement. Two senior Russian sources say Putin will agree to terms on the basis that Ukraine does not join NATO, recognizes Crimea as part of Russia, and cedes significant Ukrainian territory to Russia, including Russian-backed rebel regions in Donbass, as well as strategic parts of the southern Ukraine along the Black Sea to serve as a land bridge to Crimea. Bloomberg says that Ukraine could become a neutral country like Sweden while retaining an army, but Ukrainian officials are justifiably skeptical about Putin's demands as Russia is still on the offensive and still killing people, bombing them. My personal opinion, the whole thing is just gross. And we can only hope that Putin's small man energy can come to a peaceful resolution, or that someone puts a bullet in his head and everyone snaps out of it. This week in It Wasn't All Bad, an unlikely group of locals filled a small New York town's EMT shortage by becoming EMTs themselves. In Sackett's Harbor, New York, 17-year-olds can become EMTs, but are eligible to assist on calls even younger. Some of the volunteers got their certifications before even receiving a driver's license. When callers see a group of teens in their driveway, they often wonder when the real ambulance crew will show up, said volunteer Nicholas Brazi. We just explained to them, we are the ambulance. A Nigerian mother named Vitu Oboro brought her baby to the hospital for jaundice, a condition that occurs when babies can't remove a chemical called bilirubin from their blood. However, the hospital she came to had no phototherapy units, which treat the condition. Instead, the child had to undergo a risky blood transfusion. Driven by her experience, she invented the Cribaglow, powered by solar energy. It is a portable phototherapy unit that can be deployed in countries that treat jaundice for only $360, as opposed to the $2,000 of ordinary units. It even enables mothers to tend to their children at home. And only in America this week, a mock slave auction at J.S. Waters School in Goldston, North Carolina, was reported by a student's mother. Ashley Palmer said her son told her that a white student acted as a slave master and a black friend went for $350. A video shows the white students using the N-word. The district superintendent sent a letter to parents condemning recent unacceptable incidents. Representative Richard Holtorf of Colorado dropped his handgun on a marble floor this week, and although the firearm did not discharge, witnesses stated that it was reckless and scary. In Colorado, state lawmakers are allowed to bypass metal detectors at the Capitol and carry concealed weapons. Now to Glenn Paul for Good Week, Bad Week.
Welcome to Good Week, Bad Week. It's a good week for the Union after Republican secession legislation in New Hampshire was voted down by 323 to 13. State Representative Matthew Santanastaso stated national divorce is going to happen. It's a bad week for empty threats after Kremlin mouthpieces on Russian TV demanded that the U.S. give back Alaska. In a tit-for-tat, Russia imposed sanctions on 11 Americans, including Hunter Biden and Hillary Clinton, but not for some reason, Donald Trump. It's a good week for the Eiffel Tower, which grew by 6 meters this week with the addition of a new antenna, making it 330 meters, or 1,083 feet tall. It's a bad week for getting back to normal, after at least 9 House Democrats tested positive for COVID-19. 5 of them attended a maskless party retreat in Philadelphia. All were vaccinated and had mild symptoms. It's a good week for New Zealand, who reopened for tourism after 2 years of pandemic isolation. The Kiwis were hit by the Omicron wave in January, but by then had an 81% vaccination rate and have suffered just 102 COVID deaths since 2020. It's a bad week for Make Work after a dentist in Jackson, Wisconsin was convicted of deliberately drilling into and damaging patients' teeth so he could justify installing crowns. In a single year, Scott Chormoli raked in $2.5 million for more than 1,000 Crown procedures, which his attorney had described as evidence of good business acumen. That's Good Week, Bad Week.
In Mesa County, Colorado, Republican 2020 election steal conspiracy nut Tina Peters, who's running for Colorado Secretary of State, was indicted on 10 criminal counts of election tampering. She requested security cameras be turned off just days after instructing her deputy county clerk, Belinda Kinsley, also charged, to deceptively obtain an access badge to the election building. She has also been accused of copying hard drives from an election building. I suppose it's easy to believe in election fraud when you're the one committing fraud. We may see an end to the jump forward, drop back of daylight savings time as Senate members unanimously passed legislation that would make daylight savings time permanent. It's up to the House and President Biden's signature to complete the legislative process and end springing forward and falling back. As soon as fall 2023. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida said, "One has to ask themselves after a while, why do we keep doing it?" House Speaker Nancy Pelosi indicated her chamber might follow the Senate's lead. And in international news, Great Britain froze the assets of over 370 oligarchs, all Russian allies and financial backers, with a combined net worth of $130 billion. The list includes former President Dmitry Medvedev and banker Mikhail Friedman. In Gitmo, Cuba, prosecutors began negotiating a plea deal for accused 9/11 ringleader Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. The deal stipulated that the terrorist would spend life in prison but avoid a lengthy and complicated trial. The case has been stuck in pretrial for decades because although there is a mountain of evidence against Mohammed, much of it was gathered through torture. Mohammed alone was waterboarded 183 times, while Russians have their share of sanctions for aggression towards the Ukraine. North Korea was hit with new sanctions this past week after the reclusive regime tested a new ICBM system that could carry nuclear weapons in violation of multiple UN resolutions. The launches were the first such long-range tests in 5 years, and a Biden administration official called them a serious escalation. U.S. intelligence believes the regime is preparing to launch the new ICBM very soon, possibly to put a spy satellite into orbit. The largest known mass execution happened this past week in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. 81 men were put to death, in contrast to 67 people in all of 2021, and just 27 in all of 2020. Due to the increased demand for Saudi oil, the prevailing thought is Saudi leaders now feel freer to act as they wish. Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the UK traveled to Riyadh after the execution to discuss oil sales. The world must wean itself off Russian hydrocarbons and starve Putin's addiction to oil and gas, Johnson said. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are key international partners in that effort. It must be true, I read it in the tabloids. A Florida man who believed he bought fake meth called 911 asking to have it tested. Thomas Eugene Colucci told the arriving officers he was an experienced drug user who knew what it should feel like, and that he wanted to, quote, put the seller in trouble. The officers tested the crystals as Colucci requested, and then arrested him for possession when the test came back positive. The Guinness Book of World Records recognized an adventure from Seattle this week for hosting the world's highest tea party. Andrew Hughes sat down with his team last year for tea and Girl Scout cookies at 21,312 feet on Mount Everest. This followed a planning effort that was, quote, full of complexities, including carrying supplies through the treacherous Khumbu ice fall. Hughes called the tea party a celebration of camaraderie among climbers, one that will be, quote, cherished as any summit ever gained. I guess you could say it's a good week for picky eaters, as news of a British woman who's surviving on a diet of only chicken nuggets, fries, and potato chips stated that she's been doing it for 23 years. Summer Monroe, 25, says that she has a psychological disorder that makes her unable to eat fruit or vegetables. She stated her grandfather once offered her roughly 1,290 pounds to eat a single pea, but she declined. "It's not that I don't want to try, but it makes me physically sick," Monroe said. She skips breakfast, lunch is a bag of potato chips, and dinner is chicken nuggets with fries. Her blood tests are fine and she's never ill. "People don't understand how I've got this much energy." Well, Summer, neither do I. Today's viewpoint comes from John Harris in Politico.com, who said, "Autocrats often believe that people animated by liberal values are too soft to withstand the steady, ruthless application of force." That is what makes Volodymyr Zelensky's story so remarkable. Until a month ago, he was himself someone trying to muddle through until tomorrow. Until the moment of confrontation, he probably didn't remotely conceive himself as a Churchill of the social middle age. "I need ammunition, not a ride." In what now promises to be a long and costly conflict, it's becoming impossible to avoid the Zelensky test. What are you willing to sacrifice in the name of your ideals? In this sudden turn of events, African countries may profit from Russia's sudden isolation, said Craig Moffat in Mail and Guardian, South Africa. In the short term, Africans will suffer like the rest of the world from global sanctions levied on Russia, as well as the drop in supplies of wheat from the Ukraine. However, in the long run, South Africa, the second largest producer of palladium next to Russia, could benefit from the sudden demand of the resource. South Africa also is a major resource of gold and coal, and this could also benefit the country as exports increase. Nigeria could help the European countries wean themselves off Russian gas by hastening the construction of the Trans-Saharan pipeline through Algeria and on to Europe. Still, many African countries will need significant foreign investment to develop their resources, and this will require wooing the West. Moffat stated in his article that he hopes the leaders in African countries recognize this unique opportunity and jump to take their place at the table. The downside is that many of these countries still have ties to Russia that date back to its Soviet days, so many have offered only tepid opposition to this war. However, if they join in the rest of the world in condemning Russia, it would be good not only for Africa, but the West as well. Russia could go back to being nothing but a cold, lonely country that remains but a footnote to the rest of the world. This reporter just hopes that the loss of the entire infrastructure of Russia doesn't cause Putin to desperately launch a nuclear attack. This Week noted, understaffing and lack of funding to suicide prevention hotlines caused some 17% of the 2 million phone calls to be abandoned before the caller connected to a counselor. 41% of texts also went unanswered. Over the last 20 years, suicides have risen about 45,000 a year, according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. The most recent numbers tabulated 45,979 deaths from suicide in 2020, and 1.20 million attempts that year. According to the New York Times, a new CDC study stated that Arkansas, which is the 24th lowest for coronavirus cases, had 23% lower rates of COVID among districts that required mask wearing versus those that did not. The study looked at 233 districts in 2021 when the Delta variant was spreading. In innovation of the week, federal regulators recently opened the door to self-driving vehicles that operate without a steering wheel or pedals, said Craig Cole in CNET. There are no fully autonomous vehicles on the market today, but a new rule by the NHTSA finally acknowledges that this future is coming. Up until now, federal law has required certain core elements of automotive production, including a dedicated driver's seat, steering wheel, steering column, and pedals. The regulators essentially gave a green light to vehicles without traditional manual controls, giving freedom of the road to companies that want to start testing autonomous pods that ditch the old-fashioned operational features. In January, Cadillac showed off one such concept car with a built-in ottoman in place of a steering wheel. Finally, I will end with a bottom line. Good news for tech, as Fortune magazine reports Intel announced plans to spend $36 billion on new chip manufacturing plants in Europe, including 8 chip factories on a $20 billion mega fab campus in Germany expected to start production in 2027. CNBC reports that a woman who worked full-time in 2020 was paid 82% of the wages of a man who worked full-time. This is up half a percent since 2019. Of the nation's top 20 jobs with the highest median income, only one, nurse practitioner, is dominated by women. Finally, the New York Times reports that airline ticket sales for domestic flights in February exceeded those for the same month in 2019, a first since the pandemic began in 2020. Travelers spent an estimated $6.6 billion on domestic flights in February, up 6% from 3 years earlier. People are traveling again. That's the news this week from my favorite magazine, The Week. But this is but a snippet of what The Week has to offer. They also feature reviews of film, movies, and books, science tech, travel, and even real estate. If you like these few articles out of hundreds in this magazine, I recommend you pick up a subscription at www.theweek.com or subscribe online to reading online at the same location. I'm Dylan Paul, and thank you for watching.